October 6th, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The German army is unstoppable. They are racing toward Moscow. They believe the war is already won. Suddenly, a metal monster emerges from the tree line. It doesn't look like any tank the Germans have ever seen. It's sleek. It's sloped. It moves fast. The German gunners fire. The shell hits the tank and bounces off. They fire again, bounces off. They fire 23 times. The shells just shatter against the sloped steel. The monster turns its turret. A 76-millimeter gun roars. The German gun is obliterated. This was the T-34 shock. German General Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, was horrified. He wrote to Berlin, "The Soviet T-34 is superior to anything we have." He demanded that German engineers simply copy it. History tells us this tank won the war. It is a legend, the best tank of World War II, the savior of the Soviet Union, a masterpiece of engineering. But there is another story, a story that the propaganda reels didn't show. If the T-34 was so perfect, so invincible, then why did the Soviet Union lose 44,900 of them during the war? Why, in 1943, did the Red Army lose 4 tanks for every 1 German tank destroyed? The truth is that for the men inside, the T-34 wasn't a masterpiece. It was a death trap. It was blind. It was deaf. It was mechanically brutal. It was a tank where you had to use a sledgehammer just to change gears. A tank where the armor could kill you without even being penetrated. This is the untold story of the T-34 from the inside. To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the genius. Because on paper, the T-34 was perfect. It was the brainchild of a brilliant, obsessive designer named Mikhail Koshkin. In 1939, tanks were boxes, flat sides, riveted plates. Koshkin had a radical idea. Don't make the armor thicker, he said. Slope it. It was simple physics. If you angle the steel at 60 degrees, a 45-millimeter plate acts like a 90-millimeter plate, and it deflects the shell. He combined this protection with a massive V12 diesel engine and wide tracks that could float over the Russian mud. He created the holy trinity of tank design: firepower, protection, mobility. Koshkin believed in his machine so much it killed him. In the dead of winter, 1940, the Kremlin bureaucrats tried to cancel the project. So, Koshkin personally drove the prototype from Kharkov to Moscow, 800 miles, through the snow, in an unheated tank. He arrived in Red Square. He proved the tank worked. Stalin was impressed, but Koshkin caught pneumonia. He died just months later. He never saw his tank in battle, and he never saw what the factories would do to his design. 1942. The Germans are at the gates. The Soviet Union is fighting for its survival. The order from Stalin is simple. Quantity has a quality all its own. The factories didn't care about finish. They cared about numbers. Koshkin's elegant design was butchered. The T-34s rolling off the line were rough. The welding was so hasty that many tanks were not waterproof. When it rained, water leaked inside the hull, shorting out the electrical system. The transmission gears were machined to such loose tolerances that they sounded like a rock crusher. But the deadliest flaw was the armor. The Soviet factories hardened the steel to an extreme degree. They wanted it hard. But in metallurgy, when you make steel too hard, you make it brittle. On American or German tanks, steel was softer. If a shell hit it, the steel would dent or deform. On a T-34, the steel was like glass. When a German shell hit a T-34, even if it didn't penetrate, the shock wave traveled through the brittle steel. On the inside, the inner layer of the armor would shatter. It was called spalling. Razor-sharp shards of the tank's own steel would blast into the crew compartment like a shotgun blast. You could be sitting in a T-34, survive the hit, and still be killed by the armor that was supposed to protect you. And comfort? Forget it. There was no heater. In the Russian winter, the inside of the tank was a freezer. There were no seats for the loader. He sat on ammo crates. The finish was so rough that crews often got cuts and scrapes just from brushing against the walls. It was a machine built for one purpose, to last, maybe, 3 battles. But the real nightmare was the ergonomics. The T-34-76 had a 2-man turret. This was a fatal mistake. In a German Panzer, you had 3 men in the turret: the gunner, the loader, the commander. The commander's only job was to look around, spot targets, and lead. In a T-34, the commander was also the gunner. He was the most overworked man in the Red Army. He had to command the tank, talk to the driver, find the enemy, load the coaxial machine gun, and aim and fire the main cannon. He couldn't do it. It was task saturation. While he was looking through the gun sight to shoot, he couldn't see the German tank flanking him. And then there was the loader. The T-34 had no turret basket. In most tanks, when the turret turns, the floor turns with it. In the T-34, the floor was stationary. The turret spun above it. Imagine this. You are the loader. The floor is covered in spent shell casings. The commander screams, "Traverse left." The heavy turret starts to spin. The breech of the gun, a massive block of steel, swings toward your head. You have to walk, you have to dance in the dark on a slippery floor to keep up with the spinning turret. If you trip, the gun breech crushes you. If you get your arm caught, it's gone. But the worst job belonged to the driver. The transmission was primitive. To shift gears didn't require a flick of the wrist. It required brute physical strength. Drivers would be exhausted after 1 hour. Many T-34 drivers actually kept a sledgehammer on their lap. Why? Because often the gears would stick. To shift from second to third, the driver would have to take his hands off the wheel, grab the sledgehammer, and smash the gear lever into place. Imagine doing that while being shot at. So the tank is uncomfortable. It's hard to drive. But can it fight? The answer is, it was blind. And it was deaf. In 1941 and 1942, most T-34s did not have radios. Only the platoon leader's tank had a radio. The other tanks had nothing. So how did they communicate? Flags. In the middle of combat, with bullets flying, the commander had to open his hatch and wave signal flags. Follow me, attack left. It was suicidal, and once the hatch was closed, the other tanks were cut off. They were a herd of blind elephants. They couldn't coordinate. They couldn't warn each other. The German panzers all had radios. They talked, they flanked, they set traps. They tore the silent Soviet formations apart. The Russian optics were terrible. While German sights were made of high-quality Zeiss glass, Soviet sights were often made of polished steel or low-grade glass. They fogged up, they distorted the image. Many Soviet tankers reported that they couldn't see a German tank beyond 800 meters. The Germans could hit them at 2,000 meters. The T-34 usually died before it ever saw what killed it.
So, if it was a death trap, blind, deaf, and brittle, how did it win? The answer is brutal. It won because it was cheap, and it won because the Soviet Union was willing to pay a price that Germany could not. The Germans built Rolexes, the Tiger tank, the Panther. They were engineering marvels, comfortable, deadly, precise. But they were expensive, and they were slow to build. The T-34 was a Timex, or maybe a hammer. For the cost of one Tiger, the Soviets could build 7 T-34s. It didn't matter if the Tiger was better. It didn't matter if the T-34 was blind. It didn't matter if the gearbox broke, because if you send 10 T-34s against one Tiger, you will lose 6 of them. 6 crews will die, burned alive, crushed, spalled. But the 7th one? The 7th one will get around the flank. The 7th one will get close enough to ram a shell into the Tiger's engine. The T-34 was not designed to save its crew. It was designed to save the state. It was a disposable weapon. The life expectancy of a T-34 at Stalingrad was less than 24 hours. A new tank would roll off the factory floor, drive straight to the front line, and be destroyed before sunset. But the next day, another one would take its place. The T-34 is a legend, and it deserves to be, but not because it was a perfect machine. It is a legend because of the men who climbed inside it. Men who knew the gearbox would break. Men who knew the armor might shatter. Men who knew they were deaf and blind. And they climbed in anyway. And they drove toward Berlin. The T-34 was a death trap. But it was the death trap that broke the back of the Wehrmacht. It wasn't the best tank in the world. It was just the tank that was there, and in the end, that was enough.